And we're rolling. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Makin Sense, South Africa's best news podcast and the Common Sense's flagship podcast. As always, I am joined by a panel of brilliant South Africans scattered around the world. Broadcasting from the last vestiges of the British Empire, the director of wealth of Audley Capital, the finance bro of Soho, Simon Lincoln Reader. Hopping across the Atlantic, we are joined by the director of the Yorktown Foundation for Freedom, the wise guy of Washington, Richard Tren, and look who decided to show up, the menace of Melrose Arch, Dr. Greta Cronje. Well, gentlemen, we've got a jam-packed show today, and I think the best place to start is with the story that captured the news headlines throughout last week, and that is the horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk. And so, Richard, can you just tell us a little bit about Charlie and what effect that his assassination is having in the US?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot said and written about Charlie Kirk, including on the Common Sense, and there's I don't want to rehash what a lot of people have been saying, but I was perhaps a little surprised at what big news this was, not just in the United States but internationally. I hadn't really appreciated just how huge his following was, and a lot of it was young men that were following, but young women as well, and also older people. And I was kind of, surprised at the depth and the breadth of his following. And we're told that if you want to get ahead, if you want to make an influence, you've got to make short TikTok videos and little Instagram reels. But obviously those get huge numbers. But there obviously was and still is a huge demand for substantive debate. People like debating these ideas. People will sit and listen to Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson for hours. And he was fulfilling this demand out there for real substantive debate on complex issues. He evolved. He was a bit of when he was a young man, I actually met him once at a conference quite a few years ago. He was striking. He was very tall. He was clearly very smart, but he was very engaging. And he started out being a little bit of a bomb thrower, but he matured into a very good faith debater. He steel-manned other people's arguments. He wanted to, use words to convince people. And people respected him for it and loved him for it. And he also seemed to live the values that he espoused. He lived a very Christian life. Perhaps I didn't realize the depth of his following, because I wasn't one of his followers, but I was amazed at the response, at his following. Not amazed at the response. I think the reason that this has hit so hard is because this is a country that's had assassinations. We've had politicians, we've had presidents assassinated. There's been a spate of political violence. But this was not against an elected politician. This was against a man who was using his First Amendment rights, and he was a political activist. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He was going out to people and arguing with them. He was trying to make the case for his worldview. At his events, he would ask people who disagreed with him to come to the front of the line and to debate him first. And I think this has hit so hard because, in a way, his assassination was an attack on that institution, that attack on the First Amendment, on our rights to free and open debate. So that's why it's so shocking. It doesn't come out of nowhere, though. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, which is a group that people should know about and should follow. They do a lot of very interesting work defending free speech. They've kind of become, it used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. They used to be a campus free speech organization. They've broadened to the broader country because the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which used to be the defender of free speech, has basically given up on that. So FIRE has taken on that mantle and has become the great defender of free speech in this country. Anyway, FIRE recently, I think it was towards the end of last year, came out with a new poll showing that only 20% of Americans agree 100% with the statement, words can be violence. 80% of Americans believe at some level, either very strongly or somewhat, or in a limited way, that words can be violence. And I don't know, what happened to sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but words can never hurt me. Is it because parents have been telling their children for far too long, their precious little darlings, that that words are hurtful and they can actually cause them physical harm? What they've ended up doing is making them more vulnerable, less robust, less able to engage in the world. I mean, we're all of an age. Well, I mean, earlier, before we got onto this, went live, Gabriel was telling me that I'm fat and ugly, but I deal with it because of Mr. Woolley and Mr. Alshel at the Ridge Preparatory School beat it out of me that words can't harm you. You suck it up, argue back, be an adult. And yet we've sort of infantilized people into believing that these words are harmful. And there've been further surveys. I think YouGov came out with polls, and it's on left and right, reaffirming this, that people believe that words are harmful, but also that violence is justified. The same FIRE that does polling on campuses, and it's called the College Pulse. And the latest finds that 71%. I actually pulled up the little graph here. Anyone can find this on the FIRE website. 71% of students nationally believe that shouting down a speaker to prevent them from speaking on campus is acceptable. 54% believe that blocking other students from attending a campus speech is acceptable behavior. And now 34% believe that using violence to stop a campus speech is acceptable. All those lines are trending in the wrong direction. They're trending more and more towards shutting down and towards violence. And the YouGov poll, 25%, the very liberal, believe that violence can sometimes be justified. And it trends the younger you are and the more progressive. I don't like using the word liberal because liberal is actually good. It's what we are liberal. But the American version of liberal is left-wing and progressive. The more left-wing, the younger you are, the more accepting you are of violence is justified in response to words. And the more conservative and older you are, the less acceptable that is. So what's there to say? This is all very worrying. It used to be on campuses, and that's where Charlie Kirk did most of his work. It used to be that FIRE spent most of their energies fighting against administrators and the campus hierarchy, the people that run universities, from imposing speech restrictions. And they would mount these legal challenges against the regulations that would that try and shut down people's speech and abridge their First Amendment rights. And FIRE's done amazing work against those speech codes and speech restrictions. Now, their work is trying to counter the demand from students to be protected from ideas that they don't like. So it's kind of flipped from the administrators being the problem to the students themselves wanting to be protected from ideas and thoughts that they might find unsettling, and therefore they perceive that it actually does them physical harm. We've gone from, I don't know if you've heard this, but people saying speech is violence, and then silence is violence too. So you can't win. If you shut up, you're also committing violence. It's a very sort of totalitarian view. We have these petty little totalitarians who are running around trying to police everybody and then justifying violence. And I'm not sure what we do about it. It's a dangerous time. It's worrying. France and my friend Marion Tupy runs Human Progress, which is this great website that all our listeners should visit. It provides wealth of data on how the world is improving. But he makes the point, and other notable writers like Matt Ridley make the point that we achieve progress by exchanging ideas. I think Matt Ridley calls them ideas having sex. That's how you get new technological advances. That's how we progress as people and how we make the world better. But to do that, you need to feel free to speak. You need to feel free to make arguments, even if some people find them uncomfortable or upsetting. And the moment we start infringing on that, it's not just that we're limiting our own rights as individuals, but we're harming our ability to make the world a better place. So yeah, it's worrying, and we're seeing now, and I'll shut up soon, but a response. The response mostly from, there's been some very good responses from people like Bernie Sanders, Democratic Socialists, from other Democrats, very good responses defending Charlie Kirk, saying how outraged they are. There have been some ugly ones too from Democrats. I look at Ilhan Omar, the Somali-born Democrat from Minnesota. And they've obviously, if you want to delve into Twitter and Blue Sky, there's just ugly stuff that's been said. But now, I think our own Attorney General Pam Bondi has come out saying that they're going to start restricting what people can say about Charlie Kirk if you're not respectful. That's not right either. There is no such thing as hate speech. As Charlie Kirk himself said, there's bad speech, there's stuff that's ugly, but we don't have hate speech laws here, and we should never have them. And it should never. We should honor Kirk's legacy by doubling down on that and protecting our First Amendment rights. I've banged on for too long.
But
I think that,
Richard, there was,
Yes, sir.
before Trump was elected last year, there was a poll done which found that roughly 2/3 of Democrats believed that he was a fascist and an autocrat.
Yes.
And in the same poll, only 2% of Republicans held the same view. And this message was repeated time and time again, including by very prominent people and publications, that he was a great risk to the future of America as a free society, that he might never surrender power, that he might use the military to stage a coup. And this gets repeated over and over and over again. And then you get a kid like this chap who's the alleged assassin here. And it's not hard to imagine that some youngster hears this over and over and over and over and over again, repeated by some of the most senior people and the most seasoned and respected institutions in America. He's a fascist. He's an autocrat. The future of America is at imminent danger. And picks up a rifle and shoots him. And so significant that sort of opinion seems to have become that some other, also YouGov data that we cited this week, show that 8 in 10 Republicans believe that it is always unacceptable to be happy about the death of a political figure. But for Democrats, the figure was under 40%.
Yeah.
And it's the incitement, the stigmatization, eventually it leads to violence, which it did in this case. So, I actually agree with what you said earlier about Bondi, but doesn't she have a point?
Well, yes, we have a problem here with the sort of catastrophizing of language. We go overboard. Everything is an existential threat, and it doesn't matter whether it's in politics, whether it's climate change. I mean, I'm sitting now in Washington, D.C. If I believed the catastrophizing language that was coming out of Al Gore's mouth, we would all be underwater here. Everything's an existential threat, and when everything's an existential threat, well, then extreme action is warranted. So you're quite right. What she was doing, though, I mean, we need to be very careful in what we classify as hate speech, and what we should just continually expose as just over the top and ridiculous, insightful language. So there is a very strict interpretation of incitement. This, I think, it's called the Brandenburg test. So so these things can be measured, but I think I'm agreeing with you too. This stuff is wrong and bad.
Just set out the Brandenburg test for us.
This has got to do. I'm not. I can't even pretend to be a lawyer. But look, this is a test going back. It's a Supreme Court ruling, and it's to do with the imminence of violence that your speech could. So if you are out in front of a crowd, calling on the crowd to go and imminently do violence to someone, that is that is not protected First Amendment speech.
Quickly, I've brought up the Brandenburg test so that we can explain exactly what it is. So the Brandenburg test is the Supreme Court standard used to determine when speech advocating illegal action can be restricted under the First Amendment, and it requires that two conditions must be met. So the speech must be intended to stir up illegal activity, not just general advocacy. And then the second is that the speech is likely to incite or produce such action. There must be a high probability that the speech will actually result in lawless action.
Yeah.
But I don't, look, on that test and this kind of action, I think there's a case to be made that in America, the degree of the incitement and the stigmatization, which is the flip side of it, to turn a figure or a group of people into, Nazis is thrown at Trump all the time, Hitler, over and over and over again. Now, if you'd assassinated the Nazi leadership in Germany in the 1930s, you would have done the right thing. And these kids that Richard set out for us with their views on that it's justified to use violence to stop speech and action you don't agree with, it actually does become quite difficult to fall back on the traditional defenses of free speech in an environment where this degree of incitement has taken place, but it actually does put people's lives at risk. J.D. Vance did a thing in the last day or so where a very good speech where he tells of going to Disneyland and of people screaming at his 5 and 3-year-old children, terrible things at them because of who their father is. And
it's very ugly. Look, in the first Trump administration, we had elected members of Congress speaking to crowds, telling them if they see Trump appointees in restaurants, go up to them, make them uncomfortable, push them out. I mean, that is directly inciting. You're calling on people to go and harass other people. That's not right. So yeah, I mean, we're in a very dangerous place. Can I make one more point, which is a broader political problem in the States, is that, we have 3 branches of government. We have an executive, we have the judiciary, we have elected Congress. Our battles should be fought out in Congress. This is the appropriate place for people to play out these big political arguments. And Congress has not been doing its job, basically. It has become a shell of what it should be. You have congressmen. Yes, I've been to hearings. They just sort of become a circus. congressmen increasingly aren't there to legislate. We don't really pass legislation anymore. We pass these huge omnibus bills where we pack everything in together and nothing is really read, 1,000 pages of bills, so nothing is properly debated. And you have congressmen who are out there much more concerned with their YouTube audience than with what their job as elected representatives. So we've kind of drifted. It's not surprising that people's anger is coming out in these weird ways when which should be directed much more productively and properly through Congress. So I put it back on them. Stop. They shirk their responsibilities to debate, and they keep on handing more of their own power over to the executive. They don't want to make hard decisions because hard decisions mean you've got to go and explain them to your electorate. So they'd rather have the executive make all hard decisions, and they showboat for their YouTube audience. It's bad.
Yeah.
That's a big fundamental problem.
YouGov asked after the Kirk shooting whether it was a once-off event or whether it was indicative of a much more serious problem in American society. And here there was a rare moment of a bipartisan convergence because, and the numbers are in front of me, 88% of Republicans and 76% of Democrats said this is the function of a much broader problem in American society.
Yeah, I think it's right. We seem to be, there's a sort of late 1960s feel to all of this. And, I've said, we've seen sort of rising anger for the last, several years. And I've said, well, at least it's not the 1960s. At least we don't have the Weather Underground blowing things up. Well, now it's kind of getting that way. We're seeing a rise in assassinations, attempted assassinations. The governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, had his house firebombed on, I think it was on Pesach, during Passover. We've had these elected representatives from Minnesota killed. We're heading into a very worrying territory here, and I'm not sure how we pull ourselves back.
Yeah, and I think on that note, we're going to continue the story of the United States, and we're going to talk about maybe an outgrowth of what you were talking about earlier, Richard, the kind of continual handover of power to the executive in terms of the economic data. But you're going to give us a little bit of a Fed update, and you're going to take us through some new US economic data.
Well, just a very brief update. So we had a couple of weeks ago a discussion on the Fed, what was happening with Fed policy. And so just yesterday we had more, or maybe the day before, more of this problem that I think I pointed out, where we had bad jobs data coming out. We had very disappointing job growth. We had some other disappointing economic data. Instead of reacting negatively, the stock market whooshes up. The S&P 500 is at an all-time high. Why? Because of the prospect of lower rates and easier money. And so again, we get back to this point where, bad economic news is good for the market. And this just seems very weird and somehow wrong that the Fed should have such a large role in driving the markets in this way and in our economic lives. There's this continued sort of bifurcation between what's good for Main Street and what's good for Wall Street. So that's just to kind of reiterate that point. Can you just
explain what the new economic data that's in kind of was showing? Why it wasn't
much slower growth? We've been promised 3% growth from the Trump administration. We're not making that. Job growth is much lower. Rates of investment are much lower. Partly this, I think, is because of tariff uncertainty. There's shortages of, there's immigration uncertainty. People not sure if they can get the workforce that they need. So this is not heading in the direction that it should be, that we certainly saw in the first Trump administration, where we saw such a rapid growth. We're not seeing that now because of this uncertainty. But like I said, the stock market reacts to negative news positively, which is just, again, this weird bifurcation.
The American market also on the Schiller PE, I think at the moment sits at 39, which is its price to earnings ratio. That's probably a 30-year peak. Yeah. The average of the last 20 or 30 years is nearer 25. amidst what you describe. I mean, maybe Simon, if you're back with us again.
I'm here.
How dangerous is that American market at a PE
Well, it's
of
very
almost
dangerous.
40?
Yeah, it's very dangerous at 40. And as Richard said, there's this complete mismatch between the expected response and the reality. And I would be very cautious to listen to any bravado that Mr. Trump has, who's just actually arrived in London, or in the event he is asked questions about the US economy here. I think that it's much more vulnerable, much more precarious than we are led to believe, than the chest beating of officials, the likes of Scott Bessent, and of course Trump himself. It's a worry.
What are you telling people to do if they were to ask you about the American market?
Well, I mean, compared to the UK, the American market is still a lot more attractive on the basis that there's growth. We had data released this morning looking at the employment market, and that's cratering. So when there is a difference. America is growing, albeit not as quickly and not as ambitiously as stated, but I'm still bullish. I mean, I am a natural optimist about the way that economy is run, and once the uncertainty clears, I think that the potential is it's great, but you have to get over these inconsistencies, and that's going to be very telling. Whether there's the right leadership, whether there's the right vision, whether there's the right understanding of how deep these problems are, and whether there's the willingness to fix it, even if it's difficult decisions, which is not the attitude here, by the way. It's very evident that the people in the Treasury don't see just how dangerous things are, and I think that that's the difference between the American financial guys and the ideologues, the student campus guys here, is that they've got an idea of problems. They know them, they recognize them, and then they set to work on them. All we have here are a bunch of guys that are, I mean, I won't call them Marxists, but they're damn close. And that's the new team that Keir Starmer has assembled around him to his biggest challenge. I mean, and he's got secondary and tertiary challenges, but as it relates to the economy, I have much more faith, to answer your question, I have much more faith that America's future is much more compelling than the UK's.
Okay, just to take you back to this PE, it's 40% more expensive now to buy into the American market than it would have been on average at any point for the last 30 years. And you're
crazy.
Bullish.
That's maybe that there are forces here that with certainty and with direction will see that reduce. I'm not in a position to answer that. We must get some of the guys that are here in London with Trump to answer that question. But I've got a feeling that you could probably locate a significant discount were there to be clarity on tariffs in the future.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I see what you're getting at. Sarah Karen.
No, I disagree with you. I'd say there is certainty on tariffs. We know that the average tariff rates globally are going to sit somewhere between 10 and 15% vis the US. That's not substantively off what historical tariffs have been around the world over a long period of time. So,
but they were coming down. I mean, they were around what? 2%, weren't they? I mean, they're substantially higher.
But we're not. Well, it depends on tariffs are very tricky things. By the time you've worked in all the non-tariff barriers and other tricks and sort of environmental concerns and the like, this is. I think we know that tariffs are going to sit at around 10%. I think that has been priced in. So I don't think that goes any way to explaining this. What may explain it a lot more is tech and AI, and whether that is completely overblown or not. Whether it's and I think in that you find the key to the answer to this question.
Yeah, that was I was about to say. Once you, yeah, that because I mean that's really what is that's the zeitgeist at the moment. Whether there's the bubble is about to burst, whether there was ever a bubble, and yeah, that would be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'd say I'm more afraid of the American market than I am of being expropriated by the ANC at the moment. Although the two are quite good hedges against each other.
Fascinating.
Yeah. For sure. Okay.
Yeah. Can I just one little point on the last little point on the Fed, which is kind of interesting, which is so Stephen Miran, who is the White House, we've spoken about this before, the Council of Economic Advisors. He's now been taken a leave of absence from the White House, and I think yesterday the Senate confirmed him as the new governor to end the term of a governor who resigned. So it's just there until January. But he's held his position. He's taken a leave of absence, so he still has his position at the White House. And I'm not a fan of him. I'm not a fan of his outlook. This is worrying, just generally for the independence of the Fed. I do think we want to have Fed decisions made on economic data, not on what is politically expedient. And there are some people in the Trump world cheering this on. And I think they will rue the day when there's a Democratic president there who starts putting in Democratic White House advisors, stacking the Fed with that and making this a much more political organization than it used to be. So this is more dangerous territory.
I think when you say a much more political organization than it used to be, that's the...
Okay, so it already is. But
it's already highly politicized.
Yeah, but it's making things worse.
Well, it ties back into a point that we were making last week when we were talking about the woke right, and this idea that, when you create what the woke right has kind of done is taken these powers that are being used by the left and created by those governments and trying to use them to do their own agenda, as opposed to actually going back and going, well, the executive maybe shouldn't have these powers to begin with, and we shouldn't, try to rule from the center as closely as we are, and we should instead try to find the classic liberal free market way of doing this, where you maximize individual liberty and you minimize the role of the state, the heavy-handed role of the state.
Yes.
Well,
but that
I think,
that's probably, that horse has probably bolted for America now, for perhaps a very long time ahead. Gabriel, I think this is. I wasn't on your show last week, but I was listening to it, and I think that the single most important shift that comes in the sort of post-liberal, slightly woke right thing that's emerging is the sense that the old classical liberals were mad because they weren't prepared to use state power to build a legacy for themselves. And I think that's now kind of, you're mixing metaphors out of the bag, and the horse is out of the bag and has bolted. And I think we're going to see a long era where the left and right of American politics agree on few things, but one of them will be using the state in order to secure your political and ideological interests.
Yeah, for sure. But I think we're going to stay on the topic of America, but we're going to switch to you, Simon, and we'll talk about the person who I think has been meddling with your connection. That's the master of the dark
He's a very dangerous guy. Okay, he wasn't responsible. It was the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. Okay, because Mandelson, he wasn't responsible. It's those guys.
So just I think you kind of got ahead of me there, but you'll be telling us about Peter Mandelson and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, and what's happened there. Can you explain the background, this whole big mess?
Sure. So last year, there was some consternation when Keir Starmer announced that his ambassador to the United States was a guy called Sir Peter Mandelson. And the reason why there was consternation is because Mandelson has been appointed to high office 3 times, and he's been fired from high office 3 times. And I'll go into why shortly. But Peter Mandelson is and has always been a major force in British politics. And I'll just, as a disclaimer, I've met him. He was very nice to me, gave me very good advice. And it's always very binary with him. The guy that introduced me to him said to me that he'll either like you or he won't. He's okay. And if you are liked by Peter Mandelson, then you get the good treatment. And if you're not, then he makes life hell. Just ask the dozen or so journalists that he's got fired over his career. But he was born in a very prosperous part of London, where I am, not far from where I am now, in Hampstead. And he was born to a middle-class family. His grandfather was a Labour politician. And he was this young left-wing guy, but gifted in ways that make me it's very difficult to describe, other than that landed him as being probably the smartest political operator of his generation. And that's a widely thought, even begrudgingly felt opinion. And a former Labour leader noticed him in the early 90s. He was a brand and marketing guy, and he was drafted in to renew Labour's image of what became in the Blair administration as New Labour. Now, that was a hell of an accomplishment, because, you don't see, we've completely forgotten about what the old Labour Party used to look like. And I alluded to it last week when I briefly spoke on Angela Rayner, representing this blue collar, we will nationalise the fruits and jewels of this country by hand and brain. Tony Blair, along with his Mandelson's assistants, adjusted Clause 4 of the Labour Constitution. So this new Labour was actually this dynamic economy, open-minded, forward-thinking. And that was him. He was the guy in the background, calling the shots, managing the appearance, and very importantly, he was controlling the media. And this is a point that I can't emphasize enough, because the two gifts that he has, and it's very rare to find one of these gifts in someone, but it's almost impossible to find two. And the first skill that he has, and I believe that there's no other person in the world who's been able to do this, is to control the media, is to control, firstly, what the party says, how it's presented, and then how it's interpreted by the media to the public, to be presented to the public. The second is his negotiation skills. He is specifically on trade, and he was so good that he was sent to the European Union, and the European Union sent him as their envoy to the World Trade Organization. Now, if you look at the guys in the European Union, okay, it's one of the reasons why this country voted Brexit. These guys are all multilingual. They all studied at the Sorbonne or INSEAD. They are thin, beautifully dressed, and they think they know better. For a guy from England, for a Labour Party guy to go and best them at their own game at the World Trade Organization is no mean feat. He is a formidable operator, but he's always had weaknesses, and those weaknesses are rich men with money. And the first time that he got fired, he didn't declare a loan from a very rich MP called Jeffrey Robinson, who'd loaned him a certain amount. He didn't declare it, so he gets fired. Then he tried to get these dudes a passport, some controversial businessmen. He was caught trying to do that. They were also very, very wealthy. And then he gets himself in the company of a very close ally of Vladimir Putin called Oleg Deripaska, and he's spotted on his boat in the Mediterranean. And then he goes. There's a very famous Italian fashion guy called Diego Dalla Chia, who makes the Todd shoes, which are very famous in Europe. And Mandelson scored him a patent warning from China. He issued China with a patent warning because China was copying Todd suede driving shoes. And so he was very happy with that. But his career sort of ended when New Labour under Gordon Brown lost to the Conservative Liberal Democratic Alliance in 2010. And he went off and did all sorts of things, and kind of in the Corbyn years, because he can't work with a guy like Corbyn. But when Starmer came back, he was very close to the guy who was then Starmer's chief strategy, a guy called Morgan McSweeney, who is now chief of staff. And it was Morgan McSweeney working with Peter Mandelson who really gave Keir Starmer the right advice upon which to take into the leadership challenge, firstly of the Labour Party in 2020, and then in last year's general election. So he is formidable. But just as these problems have haunted him in the past, it's come back in the form of Epstein. And this is a very serious, this is a really, really serious problem for him, because everyone knows where the Epstein story is. And it's one of the, I dare say there's that wonderful statement that you'll be forgiven for anything except not making an effort. And that implies if you tell a lie, or if you steal a couple of million in enough time, you'll have forgiveness eventually. But I think alongside not making an effort, something that's emerged as unforgivable is association with Jeffrey Epstein, because nobody knows what was really going on there, and we won't. And I think we kid ourselves and we come up with conspiracies, and we talk about or human trafficking, which is one of the few charges that is credible. We talk about the intel agencies. We talk about massive honey trap and compromise and blackmail schemes. But what was actually going on there, I don't think that we'll ever know. So Mandelson is now in last year is ready to take this position, but it's a very interesting story, and I'll end with this story about how it came about. We have the U.S. elections. I can't remember a date in November, the 6th of November 2024, if I'm right there. And 2 hours before the networks call the elections, Morgan McSweeney is with Keir Starmer, and they say, right, we are going to call a guy called Peter Mandelson, and he's going to advise us on what's going on, because we can smell tariffs coming down the line, and there's a bit of a problem. So they get on the phone to Mandelson, and they say, look, you need to help us. You need to advise us out of the situation, because 90% of the Labour front bench have insulted Trump in some way. And Mandelson goes, oh, well, that's funny, because I also insulted him. and they talk through the situation. And at the time, Keir Starmer says that he is not aware of these allegations. And I seriously doubt that. For a lawyer not to grasp what's actually been happening here, I just can't buy the story. But Mandelson is, as I said, he's an operator. And the first thing that he does once he says he's interested in that position is that he publishes an apology video to Trump and says, I was wrong, and so on. He gets to Washington. He starts cultivating his network, opening his Rolodex. He is so connected. He's friends already with Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is also gay. They've been on holiday before. He knows everyone. And how successful has he been in Washington? Well, you can judge it in two ways. You can see that the UK was one of the first trade deals. It got significantly less of a tariff than the EU. It got 10%. Starmer apparently mandated him with zilch. It's not going to happen, but he got that. But then he also got, very interestingly, he also got the respect of Republicans in Washington. They made him a plaque. I sent it to France. Okay, they made him a plaque because he was clearly acting in his country's best interests. He wanted the best for that relationship, and you simply cannot you cannot fault the logic. You can when you incorporate the Epstein stuff, but very few people had an idea at the time. The American investigators knew. Chris Lisavides, who was Trump's co-campaign manager, he knew. I don't know how he knew. He might have had intel sources, but the day that he was appointed, Chris Lisavides came out and said, "This is the wrong guy. He is." The lady that they had there before, Dame Karen Pierce, was exceptional, really popular on both sides of the aisle, and I think that this puts Starmer in the worst possible position. And last week I was explaining what a difficult position the guy's in. Okay, this week it's impossible. It's like there's no bottom. Okay. He is being accused by his own backbenchers of judgment. Now, that's a legitimate complaint. But people in the Labour Party are talking today and saying that this has finally done it. He's out before the end of the Labour conference in May next year. So, Mandelson is an operator. Whether you should have appointed him and whether you should have done more due diligence is obvious. It's not a great position to be in. Mandelson apparently hasn't gone quietly. He refused to resign, so was subsequently sacked, and he's managed to keep on the payroll, which just proves the point about the guy, how skilled the guy is. And I have no doubt, finishing with this before I hand back to you, Gabriel, I have no doubt that he will be back and he will see to Keir Starmer's demise in March next year in whatever way he can in May, in that Labour Party conference. Over to you, Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I think we are being subject to various web attacks by forces in Britain that you have annoyed.
I think let's call them out. It's the Liberal Democrats Green Alliance.
What's it, with the boomer dads, the woke boomer dads attacking us.
Simon, can I ask? You mentioned him sort of being finished. Do you mean that his lord, because he's Lord Mandelson, right? So will that be removed? Will he be kicked out of the House of Lords? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh. No, I'm talking about Starmer as being dislodged as a result of
Starmer. Okay, so Starmer. Mandelson will remain Lord Mandelson, and he'll keep
Mandelson.
That
there's been no talk of Mandelson losing his peerage. There's been no talk of him losing his titles. He's still on the payroll, and he will maneuver and look after himself in a way that he always has, and he will come back again because that is his entire career. Yeah. It's very difficult to come back from not declaring your interests, especially in the age that he was. He did so. It's very difficult to come back when you try and meddle with the systems that issue passports. He did that and he came back. It's very difficult to get your reputation bleached from hanging out with an oligarch who is suspected of throwing a man off a mountain. Oleg Deripaska, he did that and he came back. So if you think that this is the end of Peter Mandelson, I would strongly caution that.
Yeah, fascinating. And we aren't quite leaving the United States yet because we have the final kind of United States related story. But this is it's over to you, Franz, to tell us about this delegation that's flying from South Africa to Washington tonight, what they hope to achieve, what they are going to achieve, and maybe we can get into what a potential US deal should actually look like.
It's a very complicated story, and let's start at the beginning, which is probably that for much of the past decade, South Africa has recorded a trade surplus with the United States. Now, that was quite exceptional in South Africa's overall trade record, because it really didn't record a surplus with almost anyone else. And the reason it recorded a surplus with America was because of the very generous provisions that America afforded to South Africa. And I can remember in the first Trump administration being in Washington and mentioning this to someone who said to me, "Oh, you mustn't let Trump hear that, because the way your government is carrying on, it will be the end of it." And warnings were passed on to the South Africans who didn't respond effectively. What happens subsequently is that South Africa finds itself in a position where it faces a 30% tariff on its exports to the US, which is something that complicates its efforts at economic recovery, certainly, but it doesn't bring about, we said it didn't bring about a category change in terms of the type of economy that South Africa was. It would still be a low growth, sub 1% growth economy with a 30% unemployment rate. And the 30% American tariff wasn't going to change that to any significant extent. It would shave a bit off the growth rate, essentially. And that was a striking thing to realize, because what it meant is that South Africa was tariffing its own economy to such an extent that even if the world's most important economy that you had run a surplus with put a 30% tariff on your products, it didn't move the dial much on your own rate of economic growth. A statement on what you were doing inside your own economy. The South Africans have interests in, let's go here. Let's go to the South African, and so that's the context. The South Africans and the Americans and their interests. This is how we see it. South Africa has significant interests in striking a trade deal with the Americans. And the reason is that South Africa's economy grows at 1%, less than that, with a 30% unemployment rate. And as a consequence of that weak performance, the African National Congress Party has lost its political majority, and it did so last year in a national election. And in about 18 months' time, South Africa goes to local government elections. That party is going to get absolutely hammered. And it could get so severely hammered in that election that it might never recover. Now, this is a very different position to what that party was in 20 years ago, when it commanded almost 70% of the vote. And what's gone wrong, if you are a member of that party and you come and see us, we say to you that your problem is basically that South Africa's rate of fixed investment, which is fixed capital committed to the economy as a share of the size of the economy, sits at about 15%. When emerging market averages sit near a 30%. You're at half of what the rest of your peers relatively easily do. Now, when you were at 70% of the vote, you had taken that number up into the 20s and it was approaching 25%. When you dropped that number back to 15% because of your domestic policy choices, you shed vast amounts of support. And the reason you did that is there's a direct link between fixed investment and growth and job creation in South Africa. And therefore, the first thing, we said it today again, this very day, if you wish to recover your majority, one of the necessary things you have to do is to raise the level of fixed investment from 15 to at least 25% of GDP. You've got to close that investment gap. And you must see the Trump administration as your salvation in that regard. You need this deal to survive. There is a sense in South Africa's government and in the ANC party that, we don't need these Americans. They've said as much. We can try and do a trade deal with someone else and make up for whatever we lose from the Americans. But that idea forgets that you're doing this from a point where your growth rate is already 1%. So if you just want to swap your 1% for another 1% for someone else, you face the same political problem. So the point from the South African side and from the ANC side is, if you wish to survive, you need to close the fixed investment gap, and who's going to do that for you? Now go to the American side of the equation. The Americans are falling behind the curve on fixed investment in Africa relative to some of their global rivals, and most especially China. And to people who think that is important, because Africa is now, this is the best stat. Africa now hosts more cities of 1 million inhabitants than Europe and America combined. And these are chiefly in economies that are growing at rates of 4% and 5% and 6%. They host the people who will elect in some form or another the governments that command 50 votes on global forums. These urban African people are now spending more dollars a day on consumer things than anyone thought possible a few years ago, meaning that Africa is the world's last great untapped consumer market. And this is before you get to critical minerals and that sort of thing. Then you get to Africa's strategic importance, and particularly that of South Africa, which we won't go into too much detail this evening. We can do a show on that. Safe to say that the South African naval base at Simonstown is one of 3 points that anchors control of the Indo-Pacific. The Americans are on the back foot at the other two, severely so. The Indo-Pacific hosts half of global trade that travels by sea. The naval base at Simonstown is also the back door into the Atlantic. China had once thought it could get to the Atlantic through the Mediterranean and got as far as Haifa, but has now been blocked. And to reach the Atlantic needs to come down the African east coast and around the Cape, straight past that naval base. Trump talks a lot about Greenland and Canada, because you can enter the Atlantic through Greenland, and about Panama for the same reason. But Simonstown is the back door into the Atlantic. So both sides have very real, immediate economic and strategic interests in finding each other to strike some sort of agreement. My informed understanding of the Americans is that they are extremely keen to do a transformative trade and investment deal with South Africa. But if the South Africans do not rock up, they are prepared to look at fallback options, such as that of Namibia, which is a small country just to the sort of northwest of South Africa, which is an excellent option for the Americans to consider. And they've already built a vast diplomatic compound in the capital city of Windhoek, which is, I say it's the largest structure in the city now, and it blocks out the sun. which shows you something about intent. So, for many months, many South Africans have worked extremely hard on trying to get the South African side to put a transformative trade deal to the Americans. And all of the people who've been involved in that have failed because South Africa's government has just not shown up. The delegation that leaves this evening back to Washington has a very limited mandate. It may only talk about trade issues, not about the broader political and national security issues that are necessary in order to strike a substantive deal, and are essentially going over to talk about blueberries and pork exports and a few other things, a bit of gas, but that's a bit of a long shot. And I put it to a chap today who's involved in these things on the South African side. How many pigs do you think we need to export to reduce our unemployment rate from 33% to 10%? This chap was completely on board and vastly frustrated himself with, which is ever more the case, even on the South African government side, with its own side. Now, there is a possibility that a deal may be done now and may be announced, but be cautious of that, because the deal that the South Africans are taking to Washington tonight, in our judgment, will give South Africa less than it has already had from the Americans, even if it is successful. And that is not... That's not something that's out of line with the pattern of behavior that we've seen from this administration. For example, policies were introduced that made it much more difficult to employ unskilled people. And on the back of that, a gimmick is introduced, and a youth employment scheme, which will employ young people. And the media celebrates this as a great policy reform and a great success. But the number of jobs lost is orders of magnitude greater than the few jobs created under the scheme. And the danger in the deal the South Africans are taking to Washington now is that, again, it might be secured, pork and blueberries and some promises on some other things. And there's interest on both sides. I mean, obviously, businesses in South Africa are very interested in this being done, and it would be in their best interest. And people who import, ostrich leather to make cowboy boots in America would also, have an interest in this being done. So the deal may be done, but even if it is done, it won't have the ability to move the dial much on South Africa's rate of economic growth or its unemployment number. Now, let's go to the deal that should be done and how it should be done. If the US wants to close its fixed investment gap relative to China and Africa, the amount of capital it would have to commit, I'm not saying it would do this, but just the math of it, would, and let's say it focused particularly on South Africa, which makes sense because South Africa is a free society and has a banking system that works terribly well and the best healthcare in the world and wonderful golf courses, and it's a free society. Whereas if you're an American firm trying to invest in parts of the rest of the continent, you quickly run foul of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the like. But in South Africa, that won't happen. If America wants to close its fixed investment gap, catch up to China on the continent, the capital committed would be sufficient to raise South Africa's fixed investment rate from the current 15 to nearer 25%. It takes South Africa's fixed investment rate to 25%, and the economy will grow at 4%. And grow the economy at 4% for 20 years, South Africa's unemployment rate will fall from 30% to 10%. Now, on the way to this long story that I'm telling you, there was a sort of stop-off in the Oval Office where the South Africans went to talk to Trump, and it went horribly wrong. South Africa's a delegation took with them a bunch of golfers who were all great guys, in the hope that this would impress Mr. Trump. And maybe the golfers did, but the meeting was a diplomatic catastrophe. One of the delegates on the South African side, a trade unionist, managed to defend the country by referencing the throat slitting of grandmothers by her telling of it on almost every street corner.
Yeah, well,
When one of the
important
golfers
to mention that they were raped first as well, according to her.
It was absolutely horrific. When I was watching it, I thought something had gone wrong with me, and it couldn't possibly be the words I was hearing on the screen. One of the golfers, when he was pressed on South Africa's relationship with the US, lost, I think, for what to say, and managed to thank Trump for supporting the apartheid era, America supporting the apartheid era South African army during the Bush War in Angola, when it was fighting against the ANC amongst the Soviets and the Cubans. It really was, and it was, the imagery of it was terrible, because South Africa's politicians were seated on a sort of a sofa, and said not a word. And these golfers, these hulking white Afrikaners stood over them, and it was just utterly frightening. Now, ahead of that meeting, there'd been alternative ways to run it. And one of those ways, instead of taking along, and these are great guys, these golfers, but golfers and gimmicks and I don't know, whatever one would take, film stars and race car drivers next or whatever, is that Mr. Ramaphosa could have attended the meeting on his own. And as Mr. Trump started speaking, Mr. Ramaphosa could have raised his hand to interrupt him. And Mr. Trump would have thought, here it comes. They're going to try and fight with me like Zelensky. And, we practiced on him. Just, oh boy, look what we're going to do here. And then Mr. Ramaphosa should have said, Mr. Trump, before you go any further, and Trump would have had his finger on the button, because he ended up playing a blood-curdling video clips to the South Africans of populist local politicians chanting terrible things. And he should have said to him, and this would have changed the balance of power in that debate, that Mr. Trump, in our country, we pray before a meeting. And he should have taken Trump's hand and said, will you stand with me? And let's pray for our two countries. And all the people in the room would have had to stand. And Ramaphosa would have said, we two great countries with great people, and we must find each other. After that, what Mr. Ramaphosa should have said was that, look here, South Africa is in trouble. Growth rates 1%, unemployment rates 30%. We realize that. We realize we're not, it's not great. But we have immense potential. And then he should have gone to details and cast for the Americans a vast opportunity. Help us refit our defunct coal fleet and protect us when the Europeans in Brussels threaten to drive even more, chiefly black South Africans, into poverty because we have the temerity to burn coal in our efforts to liberate them. South Africa has enormous defunct coal capacity that could easily be brought on steam quickly and cheaply, and in fact in sufficient volumes to allow the country to again aspire for the next decade to a growth rate of between 4 and 5%. And he should have said to Mr. Trump that once we've done that together, perhaps you can help us. We'll put out a call for things. The Russians will bid, and you too, and we'll see who can do the best job, Chinese. Then, if we get the power surplus up, our steel industry again becomes viable. South Africa's busy mothballing its steel industry as we speak. South Africa is one of few countries that has the chrome and the iron ore and the coal in exactly the same place. And its steel industry is therefore a really viable option. And if we get the steel industry going, we can work together on enormous infrastructure refitment and building for South Africa, ports, rail, roads, the whole thing. And the relationships we'll develop with American firms, because we'll invite them to help with this if they can do so effectively and cost effectively. And if you can buy some of our bonds to help us finance this, the relationships we build, we can take into Africa together, American and firms. And this is what I've come to tell you. Not defending the indefensible or arguing about political things. And that we believe, I mean, you're a sovereign state, we believe that the United States makes its own decisions, but we are strategically important. We do anchor the Indo-Pacific. We are the back door into the South Atlantic. And if our economic dealings can get some way down the road, perhaps we can start thinking about a new transatlantic partnership between ourselves, the UK, the Argentinians. None of which would be to say that South Africa turns on China at all. The next week should be in Beijing, making the same speech and seeking the same concessions, and that remains on offer. And I chatted to someone in the very recent past. Said absolutely, if you guys rock up with a plan like that, very, very high chance that it could be done, and the effect would be absolutely transformative. It would be the equivalent of Putin's brilliant speech in Alaska last month, where he spoke to the Americans in the way that they would have liked to hear. Didn't mean he changed his mind on the rest of the world. He was just doing expert diplomacy. And so the state of play, Gabriel, is that after a very fortunate long run of a trade surplus, South Africa's position came unstuck with the Americans. We've come under vast pressure, but pressure that in fact served to highlight the extent to which South Africa's government tariffs its own economy. These trade guys going across are all good guys and will do their very best, but they don't have a mandate to discuss an actually substantive deal or the political questions behind such a deal. The last thing I want to say, because no one said it, is that a number of non-government actors have been to Washington over the last few months to go and talk to the Americans. One of those was the DA MP Emma Powell. Another one is an ex-South African venture capitalist by the name of Andre Pinaar. And a third is three Afrikaner leaders who went across and did a briefing at the Hudson Institute where they spoke about South Africa. Now, in the South African press, and as a consequence of a intelligence report that's been leaked to some journalists, these parties, together and individually, have been blamed, together with some other third parties that went over, the sort of Solidarity and AfriForum guys, with sabotaging the relationship with America and being the reason why South Africa faces these very high tariffs. Now, one by one, I want to go through them. First is Emma Powell. Now, I've actually never met her in person. I've spoken to her once or twice on sort of Messenger, but I've asked people who I trust what she's all about. And they say she's a great person. She's the kind of person who sits in South Africa's parliament, which is mind-numbing, because she really wants the country to be a success. And her efforts in Washington were to say, do not take actions against South Africa that would do great harm to its people or its economy. And we need to find a way to do a fantastic and constructive deal together. And what has been said, to my knowledge, which is quite extensive on this, what has been said about her as sabotaging the country and bad-mouthing it, etc., is completely false. Why would someone that has so many options, is very talented, actually go and sit in Parliament in South Africa as a sort of penance, I think, a sort of national service, and then take the opportunity to go abroad and try and sabotage the very country that you're working so hard to save? Second person whose name pops up is a chap called Andre Pinaar. I know Andre a bit, and as far as I know of his activities on South Africa and its trade relationships and economic relationships with South Africa, I think he has worked incredibly hard to convince people on the American side, and so have his colleagues, that what needs to be done here is a substantive trade and investment deal with the South Africans. And my knowledge of his efforts and what has been written about them are completely at odds with each other. And again, to my knowledge, here is someone who didn't have to do it. I mean, he's successful in many respects, seems well off enough, has very interesting life, actually trying really hard to say, look, let's do what's in the best interest of this country and a substantive deal. And then the three, what they call the three amigos, the three Afrikaner leaders that went across and spoke at Hudson, went out of their way to say South Africa and its people have so much in common with Americans in terms of values and interests. And we need to find a way to make this work and to be a success. The fourth group that's gone across and also gets this sort of bad press is the sort of AfriForum and Solidarity crowd. Now, if you're not familiar with them, they're kind of Afrikaner nationalist group, exists in South Africa, vast following, hundreds of thousands, literally, of members between them. And they get press for saying they wanted to go out of their way to sabotage South Africa and undermine its economy. Now, I mean, I've had my run-ins with them. But my understanding is that they were very worried about Mr. Trump's initial offer to, he had offered refugee status to Afrikaners, and some actually went across as refugees. And this worried some of these guys because they feared that Afrikaners might wish to exit South Africa in large numbers. And they've worked very hard to ensure that there will be a long and successful and prosperous future for Afrikaners within the country. So as in the case of Emma Powell and Andre Pinaar and the three amigos, it makes absolutely no sense that these people who spent every waking hour trying to make the country a success, in their case for Afrikaners to live in this latter group, would go about trying to sabotage the success of the economy that they're trying to save. And time and again, in our experience, when the question comes up of why hasn't the South African government been able to do this transformative deal with the Americans, a deal, mind you, just to be reminded, that might even save the ANC from the hell that it's walking into. The blockages appear to sit on the side of the South African state, not on the side of these third parties. And And I have no doubt that if South Africa appeared in Washington with a serious representation, a delegate with a mandate to talk and make decisions, I'm very confident in telling you that within a month, the skeleton of a transformative trade and investment and perhaps even broader diplomatic Atlantic deal with the Americans can be struck.
Richard?
Yeah, so Frans, your fantasy meeting, what might have didn't go down. So do we conclude that the ANC doesn't want a deal? That would they rather have a shrinking economy that they have more control over than a growing economy that they have less control over?
No.
How do I conclude?
No, that is not right. Not in my
Okay.
experience. In my experience, there are serious people in the ANC who, when you put the opportunity to them, as I've tried to do here this evening, long-winded, but it's a complex story, think, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and this is something the way I put it, the Americans get on fairly well depending on the issues with Putin. Why are you fighting with the Americans? Putin's your great ally. He gets on with them, makes this very clever political speech in Alaska last week. And there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be in the same position. It's got nothing to do with picking sides, nothing to do with turning our backs on China, which will be an important part of South Africa's future. We have an editorial tomorrow in the Common Sense that sets this out, actually. Quite a controversial thing to read, I think, for some people. It's got nothing to do with that. So, and then, yeah. And not people who are trying to placate me or anything. I think people who are convinced that this is the kind of transaction we need to do. But we started earlier talking about sort of misleading information and the like, and how that, it's contaminated parts of America. There is a view that's spread in South Africa that the Americans wish to punish us and do us harm, that they are seeking to cause chaos and havoc here. Now I can tell you that there are serious Americans who are worried about how far they've already gone on South Africa, for the reason that they say we must not punish the country and its people and its economy for the actions of individual political leaders within it, and are actually very cautious on this, and why even our blueberry and pork chop deal and bone in chicken thigh deal might be struck is because of that sentiment in the US. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've stopped now. Yeah.
I think, Frans, on just a last kind of question on that point is, I think it's a point you alluded to earlier that you didn't flesh out well enough. And I want to relate it to another issue, but you talked about how there's been a pattern of behavior established, it seems, by the administration in which they make a mistake, something happens, and then they go and create a political theatrical gimmick to kind of, placate people, and then their supporters in the media will come out and say, well, look, they've now solved the problem, although the problem is worse.
Yeah.
And we've got on this, we've got this on the American stuff, but we've also kind of seen it happen in the when we're dealing with kind of foreign policy questions and allying with with our kind of more dubious allies. And it seems as though you keep mentioning, and you always love to talk about these serious ANC people who will come to you and talk to you, don't like what they're seeing. And is it maybe just the case that there's been a kind of capture of the kind of key decision making points in the executive by a very small handful of people who are making decisions that go against the kind of wider interests of their party that are based on some sort of is it some sort of ideological thing? Like, what is driving this?
No, I don't know. This is the same as Richard's. When you talk about our more dubious global allies, I take it you mean Brussels. The I don't know, Gabriel. I don't know. I think I mean one of the it's not quite the answer to your question, but probably is good enough, is when you can talk to key people one-on-one, and it's actually quite encouraging. Certainly more than anything I've seen in 20 years. And then when the ANC goes back into its collective, it seems you see no sign of that. And one of the reasons might be that the ANC's board, if you think of it as a corporation, the corporation has a board. In the case of the ANC, the board is its executive committee. Now, the executive committee of the ANC, once all the hangers-on and so on have been assembled, reaches to almost 100 people. And the 100 people hold very different views on the world and very different interests. I mean, this is a party that's racked with a problem of assassination. So when I say very different interests, it's not, not gardening and the like. And now the chairman of the board, Cyril Ramaphosa, who I think had he inherited a South Africa that was growing at 5% with lots of electricity and sound institutions, would probably have gone down in history as one of Africa's great leaders. He believes, or appears to believe, at least he says this, that before we do anything, we must find consensus. And that's impossible. And so the ANC drifts from 100-member meeting, which is a horrible snake pit, to 100-member meeting with the sort of executive chairman, or sort of non-executive chairman rather, who sort of presides over this and has a general discussion about what we might do. And therefore the party's it's immunized itself against the ability to reform because it doesn't have the executive ability to take a decision. And if any corporation was in the multi-billion-dollar corporation, which is really what you are if you're a government of a sort of smallish economy, had the product run out of electricity and the clients or the customers were leaving to other brands, and we were being, I don't know, sanctioned for things you'd done, and the chairman of the board couldn't make a decision, and the board had 100 members on who spent their time fighting with each other, then yeah, that's probably what you'd see is what you see when you look at South Africa's leadership. Current leadership makes it very difficult and in as far as that understanding has landed in Washington, I think there's actually quite a lot of sympathy for the position, and I think still a great understanding that both South Africa, which everyone that's been lobbying for this kind of deal has stressed, a great sympathy and understanding that in time, the potential of such a trade and investment and diplomatic pact on the back of it would be vastly to the advantage of both countries.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great place for us to leave it this week. So thank you to our esteemed panel for your contributions today, and thank you to everyone for tuning into this week's episode. Come back again next week to watch another episode of South Africa's best news podcast. I'm Gabriel Makin, and this has been Makin Sense.